Feel Good for Men Who Want Change is a podcast about exploring healthy masculinity through open, honest conversations. No preaching, no shaming, just thoughtful reflection and action. In this episode, we're looking at the gnarly relationship between men, meat, and identity, and how small shifts can create powerful change. Now, my guest today is Mark Breen MacCormick, a senior creative partner at Hubbub, who are an award-winning UK charity that uses playful, creative campaigns to inspire more sustainable lifestyles. And their new report is all about men and their meat consumption. Before joining Hubbub, Mark spent years working as a professional chef, giving him a unique perspective on food, culture, and personal change. And I'm excited to have him here today on Feel Good. Mark, welcome to Feel Good.
Hello. Lovely to see you again.
Yeah, and you. And yeah, I should say we met at the, before, but spent a lot of time together at the launch of High Stakes, this Hubbub report. Great event, great group of people. How have you been feeling since that all went live?
I've been thrilled. There was as anybody knows who's ever had to organise an event, there's a heck of a lot of work that goes into that. And what you want to see is some kind of energetic conversation and conversation that continues after that, so that you can move things forward.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, energetic conversation. We'll hopefully have some of that today, and we'll talk on the report. But I guess what's really interesting about you and your background is your relationship with food. And I guess I'd love to hear a bit about your early days as a chef and a cookery teacher, and what drew you into that world.
Yeah, absolutely. So I won't start from day one of my life, because we could be here for a long time. But I've certainly always had an interest in food. Like, some of my happiest memories are making cakes with my mum. I think that's that's a lot of people who've had that experience, and just the enjoyment you can have from food. And also, I think when not liking food, when food's been bland when I was little, the kind of upset around that kind of thing sticks in people's minds. And always just wanting to make really, really nice food and have social situations where people can enjoy it together. So one of my early memories is my mum showing me how to make a bolognese. So that would be the dish I would kind of go to all the time, probably cooking it a couple of times a week from in my teens.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a great culinary role model then, doing a lot of work with your mum.
Yeah, that's right. I think everybody's got someone that they look to. And what's been really nice is my mum learning from me as I've kind of got older as well, and renewing her interest in food. She learned from a 19 sort of 50s childhood where food was relatively plain but quite wholesome. But she's learned how to spice things, how to season, and all those kind of things. So it's been nice kind of learning from her when I was younger, and her having the opportunity to kind of refresh her interest in food as well. Yeah,
amazing. And were you working in sort of commercial kitchens, large? Like, what was your journey like?
Well, I've done a few things. I've worked in commercial kitchens. I've worked in some Michelin star restaurants, but having had some really good experience, but also some not great experiences in restaurant kitchens, I decided that that's not where I saw myself in the end. I kind of, when I went to chef school, I wanted to train. I wanted to become a head chef. I wanted to become a head chef in the highest end restaurant that I possibly could, serving like the most kind of elegant, exquisite food that's possible, and be the head chef. But I quickly realised that while many restaurant kitchens are really kind of good, healthy learning places, not all of them are. And decided I'd probably prefer to kind of branch out on my own. So I became a private chef running events, weddings, birthdays, big dinner parties, and also teaching cooking for a couple of different cookery schools. So kind of took a diversion away from where I thought I was going to go. But always very, very interested in the ingredients, in seasonal food, what the provenance of the food was, what the relationship between the people who grow the food and the chef and the people eating it is. And that kind of started a little bit of a journey for me.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, because it's like, from the outside, I mean, I've spent a little bit of time in hospitality, not in the kitchens. Like, it is a very particular kind of lifestyle environment working as a chef, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's frenetic. People are tired. You work very, very long hours, and that can lead to some great crack. Like this, the humour in kitchens is really, really fun, really
Yeah.
fantastic, and a lot of it's based around the food and just enjoying
Yeah.
cooking together, but also that kind of energy and kind of environment where there's a lot of pressure can also lead to kind of quite difficult situations as well. People are under a lot of pressure. They're with each other probably more time than they're with their wives, their children, all those kind of things. So it's kind of a mixed blessing spending that much time in a high pressured situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And like looking back now, how do you think working in those environments shaped your sort of identity or culture or the way you think about food, or did they?
The restaurant kitchens probably turned me off in the end slightly. I had some really good experiences in a couple of kitchens and then some really poor experiences in the final restaurant I worked in. I was like, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm not, no one needs this crap. That's just, you have a head chef who's got a really difficult personality.
Right, okay.
And this probably touches on what we're going to get into later in the conversation, but overly macho, overly aggressive, overly bullying, all of those things. And I was like, nah, not for me.
Yeah.
Not for me. I don't need this in my life. So that's when I kind of made it a shift. But also it shaped probably a little bit my personality in terms of resilience, in terms of knowing what I'm willing to put up with, knowing what I'm, where lines can be drawn. So it's quite a formative experience working in those situations. And then the following years working as a private chef and a cooking teacher. Cooking teacher is a really interesting one because you have to, it's somewhat theatre. You're playing a role. People come to a cooking lesson expecting a chef or what they think of as a chef, and you can play up to that role, and it's part of the fun of the situation. And also, you're having to get a job done, so you do have to be slightly more direct than you might be in your normal life.
Who are you teaching?
I've taught everybody from people who wanted to pay like a decent amount of money to come and cook really exquisite food to kind of community groups. My favourite group that I taught were a group of deaf people.
Wow.
I can't sign, despite the fact my mum's quite deaf. She can't sign either.
Oh, right.
But I had a sign kind of, what would you call it? A sign?
Translator?
A sign translator, yeah. I had a sign translator with me, and I really I felt like I was part of that community. We had some, just some great jokes and turned out some really, really good food. And it was, I think a good kitchen's about the vibe in there. Like how are we all feeling? We're all feeling excited, positive, hungry, all those kind of things.
Yeah. Amazing. And where did sort of sustainability and your current line of work come into this for you?
Well, I've always had an interest in social justice. I've always been interested in people being treated equally and fairly. And that, whether that's in a restaurant kitchen, but it's also about the people who produce our food. It's about the animals. If we're looking at animal farming, how the animals are treated as part of it, the people who pick our food. So it started to focus my attention on how the food was produced. I love the outdoors. I love, cycling, surfing, running, climbing, all of those things. And so I've always been interested in having like a beautiful external environment. And this kind of interest in social justice, animal welfare, the environment all came together. And the more time I spent on farms with farmers and producers and seeing their passion for what they're producing, as part of my role as a chef, I'd like to know where things were coming from. That kind of built my interest in that area.
And at what point did you decide to sort of leave the kitchen, whether that is commercial chefing or teaching, and move into more of the campaign work that you're doing now?
Well, it's been gradual, but the big change was COVID. Like for a lot of people, because I was still regularly teaching cooking, regularly running food events, chefing, all of those kind of things. But COVID changed an awful lot. It meant I couldn't run any events, so that element of my business closed at a day's notice. But I was still teaching cooking, and I was doing it online. which was really good because basically I was getting paid to cook my dinner.
Yeah. No, I never thought of it that way, yeah.
Whilst talking to people, whilst doing it
Yeah.
and talking them through cooking their dinner. And that was great. It was really enjoyable. But what I couldn't do is I couldn't really see very well what they were doing. And I certainly couldn't smell. So cooking sensory.
Yeah.
And if you're teaching cooking, the first time you can normally tell that something's going wrong when people are actually cooking rather than chopping stuff up is you smell something. And I couldn't do that when I was teaching cooking.
Sure, yeah.
And I was like, this is good. I'm enjoying it. I'm certainly enjoying getting paid to cook my dinner.
Yeah.
But it's not the same. And I'd been working with environmental charity Hubbub, who I'd been for a little while at that point, just doing the odd day's work and setting up some food waste programs with them.
Okay.
And they offered me a contract at that time.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a really conscious decision to stop teaching cooking and to stop, working as a private chef. But the situation kind of changed a little bit.
Yeah.
So I had to make a change as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of good, I was going to say good, but there's a lot of origin stories for career change that come out of COVID. So, as much as there's a lot of bad that came with that, maybe some good too in terms of reflecting on what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes the switch is not what you expect, is it? And the switch comes and you think, well, I'll make the best of this situation. Yeah. And it's turned out really well for me because it's allowed me to keep working with my kind of passion for food, keep having an impact, keep talking to people about food. Yeah. I do miss being in the kitchen a little bit, though. So maybe that'll come back at some point in the future. I don't know.
Maybe. Well, talking about food then, as I said at the start, we were recently at the launch event for this great report that you and the team at Hubbub have produced, which is called High Stakes, How Young Men Are Beefing Up Their Diets. And I suppose before we sort of go into the report and its findings, like what made you and the team at Hubbub focus on young men and meat consumption specifically?
Well, we're particularly interested in meat consumption generally because it's one of the two main things that people can do to reduce their impact on the environment. The other one being food waste. But in terms of environmental hotspots, food waste and meat are the two main things. The impact of meat consumption on the environment is massive in terms of land use change, water consumption, air pollution, water pollution, greenhouse gases. I saw an interesting stat recently that a beef burger contains 96 or produces 96 to 98% more greenhouse gases than a plant-based, a tofu equivalent.
Right. Okay.
For example, so just on it's a good example. That probably speaks to men.
Yeah.
So we carry out polling twice a year, and we noticed an anomaly in the data. Generally, meat consumption's been reducing year on year. It's reduced by 17% between 2008 and 2019. And that's been a steady decrease. But we noticed one group was eating more meat year on year. And that group of people was young men. Now, it's hardly surprising that men are eating more meat than women. They always have done. Yeah. But what was surprising to us is that their meat consumption's going up year on year, that they're eating more meat than anybody else, and they're less willing than other groups to reduce their meat consumption. Yeah,
that really leapt out for me because when you consider, the other introduction to this report from the UK Climate Change Committee that we need to cut our meat consumption by the equivalent of 2 kebabs worth per week to then have this one, quite important group of the population be increasing seems like a sort of a stark difference to see.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about young men is that they're quite an influential group. So they're making changes now, or what they're doing now is setting their kind of behaviours for the rest of their life in many cases, but also they're influencing other people. They're quite a powerful group still, and will continue to be. Yeah. So we're really, really interested in this group of people and what they're doing and why they're doing it.
Yeah. So maybe just if we just double click on the group for a second. So what was the age range? What were you sort of seeing generally? And were there any sort of particularly surprising or striking findings or numbers for you?
Yeah. So the age range we're looking at is 16 to 24s.
Yep.
That's quite an interesting age range because that's the phase of life, lots of life transitions. You may or may not be finishing school at that stage. You may or may not be going to university. You may or may not be taking your first job or living on your own for the first time. So it's a life stage of life transitions.
Yeah.
So that's particularly why we were interested in this group. And the stats that really stood out for us as we looked at the polling that was gathered over a 3-year period with a sample of 12,000 people. So it's a decent sample. But they're twice as likely to say they're eating more meat than older men.
Okay.
So big difference there to the wider male population, and 3 times more likely than the general population to say they're eating more meat. So we wanted to dive into that. We leapt into it with a literature review. We wanted to see what's happening, what's driving this. And one of the first things that we found out is that lots of studies around environment, around behaviour change are overweighted towards women. So this kind of pattern that we've come across through our polling had been hidden because so many studies that were focused on this generation of people were mixed. They were male and female, which starts to hide it anyway. But also there were usually more women than men in the studies. Yeah,
that leapt out to me as well from the report, because quite often you hear the opposite, I guess, particularly with medical research where they're predominantly done on groups of men. And so it's women who are underrepresented. And in this case, it's an interesting parallel. And what that means is uncovered now that you've looked into it.
And I think what it meant for us, because our polling and the literature review has gone into this, but it's also thrown up quite a lot of gaps in the evidence that's available at the moment. Yeah. So that's what we want to focus on next. We want to kind of dive in to young men's attitudes and their motivators around meat, their current meat consumption, their current attitudes to the climate, their current attitudes to sustainability generally, and we really want to get into that more deeply because we know we've got quite a few pieces of the jigsaw, and a lot of that's in our report that we've just released. But we know we're missing some of those pieces as well. So we know we don't know everything.
Yeah. If you had, I guess, unlimited resource and budget, like what would you personally go after next as your next study?
What I'd like to do is we've ran behaviour change trials previously. We've done it around food waste. We've done it around sustainable diets. And I'd like to work with a group of young men and examine, just hear from them directly, but then also to look at what interventions can take place. And intervention sounds like a scary word, but basically what would motivate them to eat well for them, both themselves, their health, and the planet.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the other things that leaps out from the report, and you don't have to read too much more around it to understand the strength of the link between sort of meat and masculinity, and how not even breaking that link, but at least getting people to think about it slightly differently is a tough task. Like, why do you think that link is so strong?
Well, the link is age old. It's been around a lot longer than me and you. I'm sure we grew up with male figures in our lives, carving the Sunday roast, manning the barbecue, curries with the lads, and you can go back a long way before that to kind of hunter gatherers. It travels through time, doesn't it? Yeah. But the link between strength, masculinity, and meat has been a kind of well trodden path, and that. It feels like that's amped up in more recent times. We're seeing the media fragment, so we're not getting kind of checked messaging through your kind of usual media sources. There's less editorial kind of guidance, and what we're seeing is a fragmentation of the media. And at a time when young men feel under threat, the gender pay gap is getting closer and closer. People generally in this country are struggling. It's really hard to get a house. It's quite hard to get a job. And there's also a lot of kind of what I call interesting messaging out there, offering guidance to young men on all sorts of things, from how to be strong, how to get that good job, how to get that salary. Have you heard of the 666 thing?
Yeah.
What is? Remind me what it is.
A 6-figure salary, a 6-pack, and I can't remember the third one, but maybe something to do with women. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So there's that kind of what you need to do, what you need to be a man.
Yeah.
And meat has fallen within that. I don't want to overstate it because it's not the only thing that's happening, but I think it's playing quite a predominant role for young men.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting, we were talking off air about the timing of your report and this Movember report about young men's health in a digital world. And you're right, it's not the only thing, but there is something about the tone and content that comes from masculine and masculinity influencers and how that will influence diet, wealth, exercise, views on women.
You can see the amount of views that people like Joe Rogan having, people like the Liver King, Eddie Abu. We spoke to some young men, talked to them about their diet just on the streets of Enfield, just to kind of find out what they're eating, find out who's influencing that. And Eddie Abu came up a lot, an awful lot of times. Now, the interesting thing about Eddie Abu and the Liver King actually is they both heavily pushed a meat diet, and they both got extreme physiques, bulging muscles, massive 6-packs. For some people, they look great. And that, for some young men, they'd look at that and think, well, that's what I need to be. That's what I need to be a man. And they're being told you can only get this by eating tons and tons and tons of meat. Is it one of, I can't remember which one. It's either the Liver King or Eddie Abu is pushing 12 eggs a day.
I think that's for Eddie in your report.
Is that it? Yeah. So that's interesting. That seems quite extreme to me. That costs a lot of money to eat like that for a start, which is quite hard to do if you're a young man trying to get your first job.
And if you're doing it for cheap, you're probably using poor quality eggs, low grade meat.
Exactly. And the interesting thing about both the Liver King and Eddie Abu, I'm not going to get either of us sued. They've both admitted it. They've both taken steroids.
Yeah.
So that body that they're selling to you is only achievable through meat consumption. Then, it's not achievable through only meat consumption. It's achievable through steroids. So if that's how, if young men are looking at that and trying to achieve that body and stuffing their bodies full of eggs, meat, whatever, they're still not going to get to where they want to be. They're being sold a fairy tale.
Yeah, and the other thing that leapt out from those videos you shared at the event launch with these lads in Enfield was one of the guys saying, social media has helped me see that I've been eating a lot of shit. And sometimes this message comes from a place of remove the ultra-processed foods from your diet, stick to clean, quote-unquote, clean proteins, eggs and meat. And if you think about someone like a Joe Rogan, where they're getting their meat from hunting, that probably is about the cleanest meat you can get. But I guess the reality for your average lad in Enfield, they're not eating that kind of meat. And so it weirdly starts from a place of health, but drives people very different places.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing with some of these influencers are aimed at young male audiences. There's some really good messaging within there. There's some good messaging about trying to achieve goals. There's really good messaging about trying to progress in your career. There's good messaging about kind of looking after yourself. But the problem is that that's been muddied in with some really wacky messaging that has very little kind of basis in either nutrition or health. And for you and I, if we were listening to that, it's probably quite hard to see the wood for the trees. If I was at a more formative age, it'd be even harder for me to see the wood for the trees. And I'm really pleased that I wasn't being put into these echo chambers through social media when I was 16 to 24.
Yeah, exactly. Because the other thing that your report, it's obvious, but I hadn't really clocked it until I read it in the report, is that these 16 to 24-year-olds were 11 and 19, or 11 through to 19 in COVID. Really formative years, perhaps their first time they had a mobile phone and access to all of this stuff, perhaps the first time parents were used to having their kids shut inside so often. So in that time frame, these messages were just landing and being solidified.
Exactly. And I had wacky ideas I still have wacky ideas now, but I had wacky ideas when I was 16 to 24, but I was much more able just to chat with my friends. It wasn't via WhatsApp, it wasn't via Facebook, it wasn't via Snapchat. It was face to face, and through gentle piss taking,
Yeah.
we'd straighten each other out on like when we were having a mad idea about something. And I think, I don't know this for sure, but it might be that that's the kind of conversation that's missing when you're being shown certain content that speaks to views that you already have, to amplify the views that you already have. You're not getting the sense check.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, there again, that we'll link to the report in the show notes so people can read it for themselves. But what are some things we can do to frame the conversation differently, or sort of shift behaviours for young men who are either thinking about this or starting to wonder about their own diets?
Yeah, I think, well, there's there's 6 recommendations in the report, and I'm not going to read them all out, but I'm just going to pull out a few of them. We've got to meet young men where they're at. I think too often the argument, number one, has been framed in a way that people who work in the environmental space want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't work for everybody. So we need to speak to young men's aspirations. We need to talk to them about health, strength, gains, how they can make savings, show them that eating differently isn't about sacrifice, but it's about unlocking their potential to eating more diversely. We picked out in the report, brands like Huel do it quite well. Now, Huel's not everybody's cup of tea, and I'm not saying they're perfect, but what they do tap into is it's about ambition. It's not about guilt. It's about leading with what lifts people up. So young men are a very homogenous group, and there's tons and tons of really smart young men, much smarter than I am. But we need to talk to them in a way that lifts them up and supports them to feel like they're doing good for both themselves and more widely. I think the other thing that we really need to do is use trusted messengers. So I, as a 40-year-old guy working in the environmental sector, as much as I'd like to think I'm down with the kids, I'm probably not a trusted messenger for them. So we need to look to sports stars, fitness influencers, their mates. We need to look at like social norming, like more positive behaviours, and linking plant-based eating to things that they already know about. There's a really good example. Liverpool Football Club have done it quite well. Yeah, they teamed up with Quorn. And they didn't just launch a product. They made sustainable eating part of the match day experience. So there was meat-free pies in the stadium. The players were getting involved and doing cook-alongs with nutritionists. And they were looking for a shared identity with the fans. So it wasn't about preaching. It wasn't necessarily about pushing a product. It was about helping people to think about things differently in kind of quite an aspirational way through a trusted messenger. That's really interesting. And football came up quite a lot at the launch event, because I think another guest was talking about a club that they were involved with who launched a vegan pie. And the uptake was really low when they labelled it, vegan pie compared to the chicken and steak alternatives. But when they named it, spicy chickpea pie, for example, actually then the uptake was way higher. And so there's something about messaging, like you're saying there, and meeting people where they're at. Yeah, I think that's right. Like the words vegan turns people off. People literally spit the word vegan as they're saying it. And it's got those kind of negative kind of
100%
knitting slippers kind of connotations, maybe from the 80s. Plant-based also doesn't go down well with every audience, although that's the terminology I use because I need to find some terminology. But no, it's about flavour. I think the thing with the pies is it was the spice that people were attracted to. I think if you put something in, chickpeas are a great source of protein. If you put something in there about protein as well, that might catch people's attention. I know when I'm looking for a sandwich at lunchtime, I eat a little bit of meat, but I don't eat tons. So I'm generally looking for a plant-based option. I do want some protein in my sandwich. I'm interested in fitness. I like climbing, so I need a little bit of protein, or some protein. And I'm looking for that. I want some ingredients with some protein. So it's probably helping people to make the link between some plant-based sources of protein and the strength opportunities that offers them.
Yeah, and that was interesting as well. The I guess confidence around preparing plant-based or plant-forward or plant-predominant meals as something that came up in the report too.
Yeah, that's it. I think education has a role. So organisations like Chefs in Schools are really interested in this agenda. They they provide the opportunities for the chefs they work with to talk to young people, to talk to young men about the food that they're eating in school, and start to build those kind of foundations of understanding that will kind of bode well for both the environment and people's health going forwards. I think probably a lot of it comes down to funding. If they can get the opportunity,
Right.
if organisations like Chefs in Schools can get the cash to run programmes like this, then, you know, it starts to open up a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
The kind of another point that I wanted to make about how we can kind of move this forward and progress things is putting more plant-based options more widely available. So I've spoken about schools there, but in other public settings, you know, universities, leisure centres, prisons, all of these things are all of these spaces are really kind of formative in getting people to kind of build a relationship with their food, to build a relationship with plant-based sources of protein, so that as soon as you or I say the word protein to them, it doesn't immediately go to meat, but opens up the diversity. We want meat as part of the conversation. We want less and better meat as part of the conversation. But it needs to be wider. And if we can show that diversity of food, then it's a really good thing. I've got a couple of really good examples of organisations that have done this really well. Now, I like a Guinness. And I think Guinness have done this really well, and it's obviously not about making a plant-based Guinness, although I think Guinness might be vegan. I'm not 100% sure. Anyway, this isn't an advert for Guinness. They've got a really good marketing department. But what I really like what they've done with Guinness Zero. It's available in lots and lots of pubs. It comes in a pint that looks like a full pint when it's poured. So when you take it back to the table with your mates, if you're all having a Guinness, you might have had a couple of Guinness beforehand, but you think, you know, I've got too much on in the morning. You take that back to the table, pretty much the same taste, tiny bit sweeter for my tastes, but it looks like a pint of Guinness, all being said, and you're having that experience. There's no judgment from any of your pals about whether you're drinking or not, and it's pretty undercover. But it still looks kind of aspirational, still looks exciting. So they've done a really good job. That's probably the generation above the one we're talking about. That's, you know, slightly probably my generation more. And then Levy have done a good job as well in football stadiums.
I don't know Levy.
So they're part of the Compass group.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So they're massive. Compass are a massive caterer, and Levy, I think, focus on their sporting occasions. And they've done something called the Signature Burger, which was a 50-50 burger. And there's a mixed school of thought on this. They're hiding the plants in there, basically. So they got the meat. People are still getting the meat, but they're putting plant-based protein in there as well. So it's reducing the emissions from the meat, from the burgers. Everybody's still getting a burger. It still looks like a burger. It still tastes like a burger. It's got the same relishes. Still got some meat in there, but it's cut the emissions of that burger pretty much in half. So those are just a couple of sort of stealthy examples, which aren't the whole picture, but they're part of the picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't drink, and so the non-alcoholic example really resonates with me. And it was something again that was discussed at the launch event, because you've also got brands like Lucky Saint who have a pub, right? And so they've perfectly blended the sort of low and no alcohol with normal alcoholic versions in a way that makes it socially acceptable to not drink. And, you know, social acceptance is going to be one of the biggest barriers to change, I think.
Social acceptance is a real interesting one when it comes to plant-based eating, and particularly young men. Our polling showed that young men aged 16 to 24 are 70% less likely than other people to feel comfortable ordering a plant-based meal when out with friends and family. So it's not just about what they want to achieve for themselves or what they want to eat for themselves. It's how they want to be seen. It's the signals that the food's giving off. And that's why, you know, Guinness Zero or the signature 50-50 burger are a great example, because they can make those changes and ease into the change that they need to do, put a bit of WD-40 on the change without kind of rubbing up against that kind of those concerns about social acceptance.
Yeah, 100%. Like even now, amongst my friendship group who all know that I don't drink, I will still get shit for like subbing out meat for tofu, you know? And it's almost like a whole nother thing to tackle around, like, you know, diet and what you choose to eat versus what you don't, and clearing that social acceptance hurdle.
I think that's the thing. If you're in a group setting, particularly with a group of men, if someone's doing something that's not the kind of the activity that everybody else is doing, there's a little bit of curiosity as to why, and then perhaps a little bit of feeling threatened because this person's not drinking, they seem all right. This person's not eating meat, they seem all right. Does that mean that I'm doing something wrong? So what am I going to do about that? And it's probably a little bit of gentle piss taking is the response.
Yeah, for sure.
So that probably comes from a place of feeling slightly threatened by someone doing something different.
Yeah, and look, I mean, alcohol is a very emotive topic in the first place, but like food, particularly online, is like a religion, and it's really hard to have a nuanced debate. I guess even you saying, "Oh, I eat a little bit of meat," that label of vegan or vegetarian can be totally unhelpful, rather than just a label of like a moderate.
I think it's incredibly helpful for my job that I've come. Like, I'm not a vegan.
Yeah.
I've never been vegan. I can cook any piece of meat better than like a lot of people. Whether it's low and slow or a flash fry over steak. I love cooking meat.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. But I take that less and better approach, and I think it takes the polarization out of the debate. Like, no one's saying don't eat any more meat.
Yeah.
In fact, eat meat, enjoy it, like really, really enjoy it. There's no flavor like the flavor of a stock that comes from really well-reared animals. Sorry for any vegans. But this is, it allows me to have that conversation, I think, with people. I'm not trying to push a vegan future, but I can see the environmental impact.
Yeah.
I'll leave the British Nutrition Foundation to talk about the health impacts.
Yeah.
But I can see the environmental impacts, and that's why I'm kind of energized to talk about it.
So we've spoken about the impact that this kind of higher meat consumption can have on climate. Like, why do you think that isn't resonating with young men as a reason to change?
Well, I've got to be careful not to speak about young men as too much of a homogenous group, because we want to do more research into kind of the individual, like lower level attitudes, the groups within young men. But recent research has shown that Gen Z is showing signs of a growing gender divide, particularly when it comes to their attitudes on politics and social issues. Just as an example, the percentage of young men that think women are as capable as men of being leaders has fallen from 80% in 2020 to just 50% in 2020.
Yeah, that was wild. Yeah.
So that's a big shift. And this sits alongside lots and lots of different views. This kind of move from more liberal views to more conservative views. It's not just equality, it fits into the environmental debate. And again, I'm being really careful. It's not all men, it's some young men. But the environment and the climate is seen as part of a woke debate. And so it turns some young men off. And I think as soon as that kind of woke alarm goes off, all kind of understanding or listening ability can turn off for some young men. So we need to find ways to bypass that, to link into what they are interested in. We know that conservatives are interested in conserving. Now, what are they interested in conserving? It might be elements of culture. Environment comes in for older conservatives. I don't know whether it comes in for younger conservatives, but there's probably elements of the environment that this group of some young men do value. So we need to find ways to have conversations about, what are they interested in? I don't have all the answers at this stage, so I'd like to find out a little bit more about this. But I think just because the values that we're seeing from some young men aren't necessarily sitting side by side with the values that kind of I'm interested in, it doesn't mean their values aren't valuable. You know what I mean? I think we just need to find out what they are, because I think that's the gap. I think, are they interested in, their family? What's the link we can find there? How can we get them to have a conversation about the environment and what the impact of that is on things that they find valuable?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting, this sort of move to the right of young men, and in some ways, like, it could lead to a place of reduced meat consumption, or at least increased focus on health foods, because there is this sort of rejection of like big corporate institutions, big pharma, big food. And that isn't that far away from swapping out, low grade or factory farmed meat or eggs for a healthier plant-based alternative. But at the moment, that's not where that story is leading them.
Yeah, you will have heard me say the words less and better quite a lot in this podcast. And it's likely that the better angle for meat and dairy will resonate with this group of people.
Yeah.
We know from kind of some of the influencers that kind of hunting's back. Who knew that was going to make it? I mean, I've seen roller skates coming back recently, but who knew hunting was going to come back? But that talks to the better angle, to the kind of the provenance of food. The thing with better is you can't have better without having less. Better isn't industrial farming.
Yeah.
It's regenerative farming. So perhaps that's the conversation that we can get into with some young men, many young men, to kind of look at the angle that we're coming at. We can't have, however many chickens per square meter and call that better and talk to the provenance of food. That's not good for your health. The way that those animals have to be reared is no good for the animals, but also it's no good for us in terms of the medicines they have to use to bring those animals through the stage of their life to when we eat them. So that could be an interesting angle to explore with young men.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the like bittersweet nature, I imagine, of doing a report like this, right? Where you uncover so many findings, but there's still, I guess, a whole nother layer of like questions and possible paths to go down as a result.
Oh yeah, like my curiosity levels have gone. You think you try and kind of solve the hunger of your curiosity by doing a load of research and writing a report about something, but there's just so many angles and side shoots that we could be going down here. But yeah, I'm as curious as ever, and just kind of at the moment trying to build some collaborations so that we can explore some of these things. So we're having, conversations about potentially doing some stuff with university students. Okay. And what else are we doing? We're talking to the British Nutrition Foundation about how we can work with nutritionists, but really to do a research study to start off with, to explore this further. Like everything in life, it comes down to funding. So we're trying to get the cash together at the moment to make this happen.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good luck with all of that. And I suppose that's a sort of natural segue then into, I guess, looking forward to what comes next, and I guess also what you've learned from this report. So I guess for you personally, like, what have you learned about, I guess, making change sustainable, and making changes in diet for either for yourself or young men as you've explored this topic, and that curiosity has been sparked, as you said?
Well, I think the first thing is it's got to be delicious.
Yeah.
There's no point cooking food or eating food if it doesn't taste good. So we need to show our young men, or work with young men to show each other, more importantly, that eating well can be delicious, it can be diverse, it's not restrictive. In fact, it's the opposite of restrictive, because you're opening up your kind of palate to lots and lots of different flavors. More diversity means better nutrition, it means healthier, it means more strength, all of those things. So that's a sustainable change. What's not sustainable is mono eating. Eating a ton of meat, because you're displacing other foods. To do that, and the health impact in the longer term will not be positive. So for myself, do you know what? Actually, getting a veg box was re-energized my eating.
Oh yeah. Or like a delivery of mixed veg.
I won't name the company. Because unless they start sending me them for free. But yeah, that's re-energized my kind of curiosity, and also the flavor. Is like when you get these veg boxes where the veg has been grown properly, no chemical pesticides, no chemical fertilizer. It tastes delicious. And I think I got into food because of flavor,
Yeah.
and that's why I still enjoy cooking and eating.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important point and something that's so lost when you're like scrolling reels on Instagram and hearing messages, this connection with food. And it was something I was thinking about actually as you were talking about factory farming, is like there is this massive cognitive dissonance between the food we eat and like the way it's actually produced, and how sort of getting around that and reconnecting with our food would be a really powerful way to close that gap. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have a bit of garden space, just started growing some veg, like getting the kids involved. Like suddenly they and I have been thinking very differently about the food we buy and the flavor and how it's grown.
And you know how hard it is?
It's really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a real skill to grow this food. But also, it's not just about the kind of the wholesome, delicious food. It's also about, you know, when people want to have some junk, how do you get the junk to taste good when it's not got meat in it? I had a really, really good 2 days ago. I ate in a Vietnamese restaurant.
Okay.
What's it called? Bim Bim Bam. No,
banh mi.
Banh mi. Yeah, sorry, I'm making words. The banh mi. I had the banh mi, but I had it with like a really well seasoned tofu and aubergine. Yeah, and it was smoking. You could have put beef or pork or whatever in that, and it wouldn't have been better. It was absolutely. It was just fresh. You know, Vietnamese food's fresh. It's zesty. It was, and then it had the hit of spice. Yeah. So it's about when you're, you know, when we want to eat some junk, how do you get that junk to taste good as well, not just the wholesome stuff?
Yeah, for sure. And like leading, there's so many different things. I mean, we shouldn't ignore the climate aspect of it, but there's so many different powerful messages to lead with health, flavor, than leading with like, this is a more sustainable choice. Like that's just not going to change people's behavior.
Exactly. And if you're eating really, really cheap meat, you kind of have to be curious as to why it's so cheap. What happened in the process? Where were the shortcuts made? To have that. Meat shouldn't be really, really cheap. And that way you get into that old less and better argument.
Totally. And look, I'm mindful that we've sort of convinced ourselves of what the right thing is to do, but it is worth acknowledging, I guess, the complexity of something like food as it relates to culture. And one of the things the panelists spoke about at the event was, you know, young men having nowhere to meet up. And so they go meet up in a chicken shop, you know, because the pubs have closed or they're not welcome in other places, right? That is a massive part of this too. Yeah,
and you know, those chicken shops are great community spaces. You know, the community centre's closed. There's a whole culture, isn't there, around the chicken shop, from the way you talk to the guy who's serving your food, but to the way you hang out with your mates. And, you know, that's a really, really positive experience for a lot of people. It's the place they go to have those chats that I was talking about, to, you know, to sense check each other, to do some gentle piss taking. And chicken shops are part of that. So what role can they play?
So look, I guess all of that said, and again, thinking about like moving forward, like what gives you hope about the situation, dietary choices, climate, this next generation of young men and their relationship with food?
Well, this group of young men, you know, whether it's the music they produce, whether it's their ability to get a message across on social media, their curiosity, their funniness, their sense of humor, these are all like really, really great things. Like, so I'm really excited about what this age group of men are going to achieve over the future years. I saw a really good example the other day. It's a separate environmental thing, but there was a group of young people. I don't think it was all men, but they've created something. So tires are the second largest source of microplastic pollution in the ocean.
Oh, right.
And as they wear down, that microplastics left all over the place, and then 500,000 tons of it ends up in the waterways in Europe. So they're an innovative bunch. Like I said, they're curious, and they've developed a device that attaches to a car's wheel and catches those microplastics as they come out. These are like young, early 20s guys.
Amazing.
I'm not even thinking in that. I'm not thinking in that way. That's really curious and really innovative. But just to say, like, people are coming up with great ideas all the time. And I think like their ingenuity and their kind of ability to innovate and their curiosity and their creativity will lead to some great great changes, and that's what gets me excited about young men.
Yeah, and look, I guess it's not an elephant in the room, but the flip side of some of the stats we've spoken about today, 40% of young men eating meat daily, the same number unwilling to cut back. That means 60% aren't, right?
Yeah.
And that's an important part of the population not to ignore or understate.
Yeah, I've been really careful all the way through this conversation to use the word some. It's probably my most said word. So yeah, I think we're concerned about the trend that young men are eating generally as a big group are eating more meat year on year. But that's not, we're painting in broad strokes here when we probably need a little bit of fine line drawing as well. Yeah,
but look, it's important, right? And it's really easy to talk about the challenge with boys and young men right now. But these are the front lines of these challenges, right? Is like what's going on, how these social media influences impact day-to-day choices, and how you eat just being one of those.
Yeah, I mean, if you're working in an environmental charity like me, or in a food business where you're looking at the emissions that your organisation's starting to look in Scope 3 emissions much more, you've got to be paying attention to trends like this, because is it the canary in the coal mine for the whole population? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know.
For yourself, is there one food that you loved that you think differently about now?
Yeah. It's meat. I'm going to pick it as a whole.
Yeah.
I love a roast lamb dinner.
Yeah.
And I'd look forward to that on a kind of weekly basis in the past. I now have it probably once every couple of months.
Yeah.
And that moment of enjoyment is like so heightened because it's a treat.
Yeah.
And that's the way I look at meat now on the whole. It's a treat. It's a treat to cook it. It's a treat to eat it. But I eat it less often, and I eat less of the crap.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to eat it in a sandwich.
Yeah.
Because, like, where's it come from?
Yeah.
It's probably not going to taste that good.
Yeah.
But I have it as a treat every now and again. So, yeah, it's meat.
And interestingly, that probably, to bring it all the way back to where we started, is more similar to a 1950s diet that your mum would have been used to, right? Because of price and availability, meat was a rarity, perhaps on a Sunday, and then you made a stock and you ate the leftovers after. And
that's it. You use every inch of whatever you've spent your money on, and you enjoy every little bit of it. You probably know a little bit more about where it's come from.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Back to that wholesome connection with food and where it's come from. Yeah.
I sound a bit worthy, but it's nice, isn't it? And that's how you get the best flavour.
Yeah. Totally. Again, like lead with flavour, lead with good produce.
Yeah.
Is there a book that's influenced how you think about change, or would recommend to men either on this topic or not?
Well, I wanted to say, I was like, oh God, because I read quite a lot, but I was thinking, men, in terms of improving ourselves as like a group of people, probably look to self-help books an awful lot, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't read them. What I read is something that's going to send me off into a nice, like, relaxed, happy sleep. And that's, on many occasions, that's humour for me. And I think also it's really important for masculinity to make sure we poke fun at ourselves.
100%.
Like, we can't if we're taking ourselves too seriously all the time, then things aren't going to move forwards at all. So it's David Sedaris. I don't know if you've ever read any of his books.
No, I haven't, no.
So he's an American guy.
Yeah.
I don't know how old he's probably about 60.
Yeah.
Lives in the south of England now, but he writes short stories, and they're mainly taking the piss out of himself.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry for is my language
it's
too
fine,
bad
absolutely
for this
fine. Yeah.
he's mainly taking the piss out of himself.
Yeah.
He's got various neuroses, as we all have. And you can see the humor in your own behaviors when you hear him talking about his like nutty escapades, basically, and they're all true stories. So I like that.
Okay.
If he's taking the mickey out of himself, I can take the mickey out of myself.
100%. Is it normally like a collection of short stories, or is there one that you draw people's attention to?
Oh, he's got, buy any of his books.
Okay.
Like they're all good. You can probably pick them off off Vinted or something for say buying a new book for about £1.
Yeah.
But no, they're just like, it's just about him and his family dynamics, and his slightly weird but nutty behaviour, and the slightly weird behaviour that we all get up to.
That's really important. Like, I think it's too easy. Like, particularly you're right. There's a lot of self-help books, and there's a lot of books around, climate change and, environmental degradation and all these kinds of things. Like sometimes when you're drifting off, a bit of self-care to just read something that makes you laugh isn't the worst thing in the world.
And to take you out of your own thoughts a little bit. I think that's important sometimes.
Yeah.
Just to kind of take yourself away from the kind of the serious of the day-to-day job, or the seriousness of just, getting things done.
Yeah.
So a bit of humour doesn't hurt.
Yeah, amazing. And actually what just popped into my head there is like how cooking can be a great way to take yourself out of the seriousness of the day-to-day and of your job as well.
It's mindfulness, isn't it? It's the cooking classes. I used to teach a lot of all men groups cooking, and it wouldn't necessarily be everyone's natural space.
Yeah.
What I found is if you put people next to each other while they're cooking and they don't have to make eye contact, they can chop an onion or they can do whatever. And the conversation that takes place in that setting while they're focused on the food is really fruitful. It's really good for well-being. It's really, really good for mental health. And it takes the shame out of having conversations around those kind of things, which particularly for older male audiences, I don't know where the young men are, but older male audiences who I work with a lot, that's a good space for them to kind of to work on their mental health.
Well, it makes me think of the, I don't know if you've seen this, the Men's Shed network that's popped up where you can go and like repair something together, do a bit of DIY, have a chat.
Yeah, so it was that group that I taught cooking to.
Really?
When they weren't fixing things in sheds and growing things, they were hanging out cooking curries with me.
Amazing.
I even took them all on a day out to Borough Market. We had a little bit of cheese, we had a little bit of wine, we sat by the river and just had some nice times together.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, really nice.
Right, well, that feels like a nice closing sentiment then to kind of draw this to a close. So I guess, are there any final messages to anyone listening really about sustainable choices that they might want to make, or anything that came up for you in the report?
I think it's more general than the report. I think when we look at the climate crisis, when we look at biodiversity breakdown and all those kind of things, it seems quite insurmountable.
Yeah.
It seems really difficult. How do you go about? You can't eat an apple in one bite.
Yeah.
But simple changes are the way to go to make a change. I think there should be zero shame. We all make mistakes. We all muck stuff up. So go treat yourself really kindly and make simple changes where you can make them. And when you make an error, don't beat yourself up about it. Move on to the next simple change that you can make, whether that's food, travel, anything really.
That seems like pretty sound advice to live by. Thank you. And where can people follow your work, and any way you want to direct people toward in terms of finding out what Hubbub's up to?
Yeah, come and have a look at our website. It's www.hubbub.org.uk.
Yeah.
And or drop us an email at hello@hubbub.org.uk.
Yeah. Nice. Oh, look, thanks, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you today. The report is great. We'll link to it in the show notes for anyone to read and look into it more. And look forward to hearing what comes next.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
All right. Cheers. Well, that was a super interesting episode. I've met Mark a couple of times now. He's always a really interesting dude to speak to. The event where they launched their report, High Stakes, How Young Men Are Beefing Up Their Diets, was excellent and led to so much interesting conversation. I mean, dietary choices are practically a religion. It's something that I feel quite strongly about too. And the link to young men and masculine choices around what we eat is laid out for everyone to see there. So I hope you got something from it. And if you did get something from today's conversation, please do me a favor, like, subscribe, or share this episode with someone who might need to hear it. It's how this movement is going to grow man by man. And if you're curious about coaching or further content and want to dig deeper into reflections around modern masculinity, head over to thefeelgoodfolk.com. Everything's there. You'll find the link in the show notes, including the link to this report and Hubbub's work. This podcast is about rallying good men who want to grow, lead, and live with intention, so that together we can reclaim masculinity as a force for good. Thanks for listening. Work hard, be kind, and I'll catch you at the next one.